person, but this is a good runner-up.
Yeah,
I agree. Yeah, I wish I was there in person, but we're here, so we'll make the most of it.
Yeah.
The FOMO is hard. I understand because, you know, when Canberra or Melbourne have festivals that I can't go to, I'm like, the FOMO is real. So we do appreciate that you are giving us your time, and also understanding that you're probably on writing deadlines as well. So the fact that you're giving us your time is amazing.
Annie, we'll do anything other than work on our deadlines. That's no hardship.
And this is why you're the best. This is why you're the best. So I'm going to be cheeky, and I'm going to have you introduce yourselves. And if you could tell us maybe the book that you have currently released, or your most recent release, or all the books that you have. I'm going to leave that up to you. Who would like to start, Amie or Astrid? Are we going in alphabetical order?
That pause was not me doing the alphabet in my head. Go for it, Astrid.
Because we're all A's, so that's why I'm like, this is going to be interesting.
I was like, I'm definitely after Amie, but no, I'll go. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I am a internationally best-selling author of young adult science fiction and fantasy novels. I love to blend genres and put in a healthy dose of plot twists everywhere. My debut novel was Four Dead Queens, and my sophomore novel was The Vanishing Deep. My most recent novel that came out was League of Liars, and I am currently on deadline, so you guessed correctly, Annie. I am on deadline for my sequel to League of Liars, which is called Shadows of Truth, and that comes out with Allen and Unwin in March 2024. So it's all happening.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on the sequel. And look, we're all writers, so we're always on a deadline. I get that completely, but congratulations. And I still remember meeting you the first time at Supernova. That was so exciting. That was Four Dead Queens at that time, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
It was BC, before COVID, and anything is a blur before then, except for Astrid, of course. Hey.
All right. Hi, I'm Amie Kaufman. I live texted Astrid as I read League of Liars and then screamed at her at the end to get me a sequel. So I am in a pretty good mood. We're bearing down on March, and I have some small hope of seeing it before that. I am a New York Times and internationally best-selling author of 19 books. I write middle grade and YA. I write sci-fi. I write fantasy. I've done a bunch of co-authoring, and I've written a bunch of books on my own as well. The latest is The Isles of the Gods. I do have it here. I've got reference copies of everything sitting here because I definitely remember everything in my own books, but if I didn't, then I would need them. So that's my latest. She's shiny and I like her. The Isles of the Gods is a high seas adventure with a roguish prince and a sailor girl who has had it up to here with his shenanigans. They need to work together to stop the gods from waking and the world from going to war.
Wow, very intriguing. Congratulations on that as well, on your book. And I have to say, I met you the first time, I believe. Oh God, this is going back a while. Ellen and Unwin YA Fest. We go back a while.
That's what I thought it was. Yeah,
no, it wasn't even YA Fest. It was Kino
Really?
signing at lunchtime with Jay Christoph. I do remember this. It was when Illuminate just came out. What year was that?
That was 2015. Like, I have a visual in my head of you, but I also, if you'd asked me when YA Fest was, wouldn't have been able to put a year on it.
I was going to say, you got a visual of this head. How can you forget this mess? Like,
right. But no, Illuminate was 2015 because we're coming up on the 10th anniversary and having some very fun behind the scenes chats about that.
Double digits in decade. Oh my God, where's the time gone? Yes, I do remember that. That was, I do remember your collaboration. I remember Illuminate. I felt like a military general going through files, going through that. It was awesome. And I hit an all-nighter reading that book, so 100%. Love both of your work. Highly respect you as Australian authors. I look up to, Australian writers as a writer myself. And one thing I'm really excited to learn about is fantasy fiction and fantasy writing, being a fantasy reader myself. Obviously, there is something about this world that draws you in. What is it as a writer that brings you back to this genre in your work? And that's open to both of you.
Ooh. I mean, Astrid, are we going towards fantasy or are we fleeing reality?
Ooh.
I think probably fleeing reality.
Right. Yeah, who wants this? I mean, I guess to be more serious, I guess interestingly, I always joke, but I'm sort of not joking, that when we want to do something dramatic in fantasy, we can, have a magical explosion or, bring down an entire city. And if you're writing contempt and you want to create a moment that's, incredibly serious, you have to be able to do what we do with blowing up a whole city with just like two people walk down the hallway at school and either their eyes meet or they don't, and everything hangs on whether they look at each other or not. I'm like, that sounds really hard. You think? I'd rather blow something up.
See, I would say the same thing, but that might be seen as controversial coming from a person like me. If I could be controversial.
Be controversial.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. And maybe I'm just not a serious person. Shout out to anyone who watched Succession. Otherwise, you won't know that reference, and that's fine. But I just love high concept stuff. I love, pie in the sky, what if scenarios. Like, I feel that you can obviously do what if scenarios in contemporary, in like a thriller. But for me, my what if scenarios always tend to go into that place of unreal, whether that's a fantasy world, whether it's creatures or beings or, something magical. That I have always been drawn towards that ever since I was a kid. I loved reading fantasy, and I still read a lot of fantasy. So it makes sense that that's what I'm drawn to with writing.
Yeah. Definitely. Sorry,
there's a tingle to it, there's when you read a good fantasy book and you feel yourself slipping away into another world, there's just something about that I love. Like, even when I don't set out to write stuff with, some kind of speculative fiction element, it becomes that way. The first problem I have to solve, I solve it with, something that is technically not contemporary, and then we're away again. So
I find contemporary just brings us too far into reality sometimes. Like, there's always, and that's why I personally read fantasy, to get away from it. And I also find it absolutely fascinating as well. But you mentioned, you love fantasy, reading fantasy. It goes without saying, being fantasy writers. And as a writer myself, I'm very keen to know, when you're writing your own work, particularly in fantasy, do you continue to read in that particular genre while you're writing, or are you afraid it's going to impact your creative flow and originality?
Yeah, I mean, I seesaw on this. I don't know about you, Amie. Like, sometimes I will be like, oh, it's too close to what I'm writing, so I don't want to have any conflicting kind of inputs. But other times I will read fantasy. Like, I'm reading I guess it's not fantasy, it's more paranormal. It's Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match, which is like my first spooky read for the season. And so you could say, that's fantastical, but it's more horror than, it's light on the horror. It's more of a romance horror. It's very hard to define.
So a horror fantasy. I'm just making things up.
We'll go with that. So I think it depends on what your project is. Sometimes I just won't read while I'm on deadline because I'm just been staring at words all day, all night, and I just need that break from that part of my brain to just have a little rest.
Sure. Amie?
Yeah, I don't know. I never really thought about not reading it, to be honest. I mean, I'm usually reading multiple books at once because I've usually so I have an ebook on my phone at all times, because it stops me just, when I'm somewhere and I go to pick up my phone, I can just open my e-reader instead of scrolling. So I've always got that going. I've always got an audiobook going, and I've always got at least one paper book going. And I mean, I'm always on deadline. I've been on deadline since 2011. So if I didn't read what I was writing while I was writing it, I would just never read it. And that would be a great loss. And, often I've got blurb books coming in, and the blurb books will be, related to the genre I'm writing in at the moment, and I want to do them. So, I've never really thought about avoiding it. I think I'm I mean, this is an example I've given many times, but but I love it. J.R.R. Tolkien talks about the idea of creative compost, that like everything you take in, the books you read, the music you listen to, the places you go, the whatever, all falls to your mental forest floor, and what you create grows out of it. So you can curate that compost. And I think on one hand, if you only read fantasy, your fantasy would sound derivative. But I think fantasy is part of a healthy diet, while you're also reading, a bit of horror and a bit of romance and a bit of everything else. I think is important.
I like that. It's part of a healthy diet. New taste menu, fantasy and others. I love it.
I mean, also, can't you always tell when someone is writing in a genre that they don't read in?
Oh,
for whatever reason, they've decided to write in this genre, and you're like, you thought that was an original idea, didn't you? That's just what we do here. So
I've met many writers since Reader's Review was established in 2009. So we've been going 14 years. I've met a lot of writers.
Oh my goodness.
And I have met writers who don't even read, period. And I was like, okay, right? So, and you can tell.
Put them right up there with the ones who say, I decided to write a YA book because there weren't any.
Have you not been to the bookstore?
Where were you, my friend? Anyway.
Well, it's interesting, because fantasy obviously has been around for quite a long time, and I guess I call it the evolution of fantasy, because like I said, you're going as far back as J.R.R. Tolkien, and then you're looking at it now. How has fantasy, in your perspective, evolved? Personally, for me, when I started Reader's Review, all there was really was that Twilight, Harry Potter. That was all pretty much I knew. But then in the last 5 years, I've seen a lot more Muslim authors or authors of color coming out, writing fantasy deriving from, say, legends or cultural mythology and folklore. As writers yourself who've been in this area for a while, how have you seen it evolve, or has it changed? Is there work to be done? What do you think?
Oh, you've literally asked me about the subject of my PhD, so I am...
Oh, go for it, Amy.
No, there's nothing in life more dangerous than asking someone what their PhD is.
I just asked a loaded question. Look out.
You did. Look, I will... The very short version of the answer is that my PhD is particularly studying the evolution of female protagonists in YA science fiction and fantasy. And I'm doing interview work with a bunch of fantastic authors with, Marie Lu and Sabaa Tahir and our own Lisa Fuller here in Australia and others as well. And I'm kind of talking to the generation who they grew up maybe reading, Garth Nix or Tamara Pierce, who they adore to this day and, bow to no one in their respect for. But when it came time to write their version of that, they were like, all right, so what would happen if I was in that book? And so, we've got, Sabaa bringing her culture to, a fantasy world. And we've got Marie writing a Chinese American protagonist, in our world in something like Warcross. And, we've got Lisa writing her Aboriginal culture in just the most fabulous way. I'm in the middle of a re-listen to Ghostbird on audio at the moment, so I'm feeling very passionate about it. But we've got all these writers who are bringing themselves in, and so there's representation in a way that there hasn't been before. And that's not to say that well, great news, we fixed it, and it's not to say there's not more ground to cover, but I think, even if you look back at the start of Astrid's and my careers to now, back to when, your site was founded, there's very measurable progress, which, is encouraging.
I agree. Astrid, I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I think everything that Amy says is true, and that there obviously is still a long way to go. In terms of accessibility, I think with fantasy, it perhaps was more of a niche genre. If I looking back from when I was a teenager, there was a lot of high fantasy, a lot of, 500, 600 page books, very dense, you've got a glossary in the back, those sorts of books that were kind of difficult to get into, especially if you're a young adult or if you've not read books like that before. And I think also in mainstream media, again, it was very niche, but as much as I'm not a huge Game of Thrones fan, I do think that has changed a lot for the genre in terms of television and film as well as books. I think that we are seeing more accessible fantasy, and it used to just kind of be high fantasy and supernatural or that kind of
a very urban fantasy.
Yeah, urban fantasy, exactly. So I feel like that has definitely shifted, and I think we saw it again with Fourth Wing, which to me is a very accessible fantasy for, even again, it's probably, even though it is in another world, it is very easy for people to pick up if they haven't read fantasy before, which I think can only help the genre because you're getting more people introduced to it.
You want people coming in, not going away and DNFing the books, I have to say.
Right. Well, and, you know, I mean, like reading any kind of book, like there's never a sense of competition because it's not a bucket list item. You know, they don't read a fantasy novel and go, well, tick, now I'll learn to skydive. You know, they read a fantasy novel, and if it's good, they want another novel. So there's always this, you know, this beautiful flow back and forth of readers.
100%. Yes. And like, just while we're on the subject, I'm just thinking, yes, there's always work to be done. There's always room for improvement, but we have come a long way to what it was. And not just in the realm of books, but even in graphic novels and TV, I'm seeing a lot more representation, you know, from culture to age to disability to gender and sexuality. It's just more inclusive now than it had been before, more representation. And it's very important. I'm very passionate about representation in these realms. I did a panel on that recently at a con. And I'm just thinking, like, just casting my mind back, like, had I been asked that question 14 years ago, I couldn't tell you. Like, I couldn't even do a PowerPoint presentation on it. Like, so we have improved a lot. And I'm actually really interested to know, in terms of your perspectives on female characters in fantasy, is there a burden on you as a writer that a female character has to behave a certain way to be deemed plausible as, say, a hero, or you know, like a strong protagonist? Is there a challenge that she has to be strong, or can she be flawed? I'm keen to know your thoughts on that.
Oh, I mean, this is a whole 2-hour panel, isn't it?
How much time you got, everyone?
I mean, I think, look, perhaps there's some people who see it that way, but I don't think the vast majority do. I mean, my first book was 2013, was These Broken Stars, and we very deliberately wrote the protagonist of that, Lilac, as like she's shipwrecked on an alien planet, and by far the best thing that happens to her that entire book is the time she gets a shower. Like, she likes clothes, she likes, you know, she's a very girly girl. And I've sort of played with that throughout all of my books, because I'm not wild about the idea that, you know, girls have to become masculine in order to, you know, perform heroic behavior. And I think, you know, even if we go back as far as you know, the Tortall books by Tamara Pierce and, you know, Alana and Son of the Lioness, that was already interrogating what a girl has to behave like in order to be a hero. So I think it's actually an area we're probably ahead of the curve in many ways, particularly in YA.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's the thing, like YA does take the desires of a teenage girl seriously. Like we write stories about them. We take what their wants and desires as something that's worthy of being written down and worthy of being the main character. And so I think that in itself is supporting the idea that, you know, that's enough. But as in to be a female character is enough to be the main character. But I do think that there is always that question of likability, where, you know, you do sometimes see perhaps the female characters that maybe aren't sweet, or as sweet as someone might like, or stand up for themselves, and they might be a little rough around the edges, that they can sometimes be questioned as, are they a likable character? And perhaps we don't get the same level of judgment with the male characters in those books. So there is still, I think, that and something we have to keep in mind when we are writing the main characters.
It's interesting, yes, because I mean, I, you know, grew up in a world where, you know, you're a female, you can only go so far in your life. You have to behave a certain way. It's not polite to speak up. It's not ladylike to be badass. So I was very keen to know if that challenge was there, or that barrier was there. But yes, I feel that books do breach that. It's basically calling out saying, no, this is not how it's supposed to be. So that, you're right. We are ahead of the curve there, I have to say, in some of the books that I've read. And we've talked a lot about fantasy and, you know, the world and everything and the characters. Why YA? Did it call you, or did it just sort of write itself? What is it about the YA space specifically that you've written into?
I don't know about you, Astrid. It's just what I turned out to write. I think that was just where my stories hit. I once had Sarah Rees Brennan say this really smart thing about YA, and I repeated it to her recently, and she looked at me in delight and said, "That's very clever. Did I say that?" But she talked about the idea that YA is the literature of transformation, that it is, the literature of becoming who you are. And I think that's something that we do all our lives, whether it's like first day at school or first day at school pickup when you don't know anyone at the gates, or whether it's first date or first date after divorce, or, we're always remaking ourselves. So I think the questions are universal, but I think although what I originally started writing turned out to be YA, it's now very deliberate because that's the teams of the audience I want to be in conversation with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I feel, I didn't set out to write YA, but I do feel like my voice just kind of lent that way, probably because I was reading a lot of teen fiction at the time. There wasn't a huge amount. YA became more of a category when I was older, when I was not a teenager myself. So I was reading a lot of teen fiction, and a lot of that back then was a little too centralized on morals and lessons to be learned. And that, to me, is not the way that you engage with a teenage readership. So I like the idea that YA does kind of put first and foremost their readership and it being entertainment. And that's what I love to write, like books that are going to entertain, you're going to have fun time, you might cry, you might throw the book across the room in anger, but you're going to get these emotions out of reading this book. And I feel like YA does that more than any other category.
Yeah. Admittedly, I've done all of the above: cried, laughed, thrown a book across the room. Oh, damn.
Yeah. I'm just enjoying that Astrid's like, I felt a lot of books were too moral, so I decided to write one where I start by murdering a bunch of people and then have some very ambiguous people that we're supposed to cheer for try and sort it out.
Exactly. It was a plan.
I love it. I love when you push the boundary. And I think what I also love about particularly the YA readership, it's a community. Like many years ago, you wouldn't have heard of a YA all-day YA fest or YA festivals. It's something that's happened in, like, say, the last, 10 years or so, I would have to say. And it has created the readership and the community out there. And I know myself, I've connected to a lot of other readers through a YA readership, which is fantastic, and I'm not a teen, I'm well above teens, and still being able to read that and enjoy it and immerse myself in a YA read is fantastic. Now, I'm just conscious of time, so just want to make sure that everyone knows that if they have a question, please put it through the chat. I think there is an option to do that. Techie people at the background, please help me out if you've got questions. Let me know.
Just click on the chat and it says chat isn't available, so I'm not.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's a question yet, because
with the little triangle, square, and circle down the bottom,
there's
Q&A options.
There we go. Thank you, our tech. Awesome. All right. Well, we don't have any questions yet, but now that I know where it is, thank you. I should have known that before. I'll keep an eye on that to make sure that I don't miss anybody. So, Astrid, you have been a solo writer since your publications, and Amie collaborated and then went solo. I'm very keen to know, first of all, Astrid, would you collaborate? And if so, who would you love to? Who's your dream collaboration besides Amie, of course?
I was going to say, Amie. I think I would be terrible to collaborate with, purely because my process is not really a process. It's more of a let's just see what happens. I'll sit by the computer and put my keys. So I think I would be very difficult to work with in that sense. But I would love to collaborate. Like I do like the idea of brainstorming and throwing ideas around. And so I wouldn't say never, but I think I would probably have to work out a process so that it would work with more than just me.
Sure. And I understand that, because I only just started writing myself and I couldn't picture myself collaborating just yet because I'm still working out that process myself. So I 100% understand where you come from. Amie, having done both, again, how does it compare, like collaborating and then going solo? Like, do you prefer one or the other? And you can tell us if you don't like collaborating, it's fine.
No, I mean, I collaborate with 3 of my dearest friends. So, and they were very carefully chosen. And I sometimes think that the fact that I've written with 3 people might give the impression that it's just easy to do. But I mean, it's all about choosing the right person, and both of you coming in with the same goals and the same attitude, and, you know, being able to figure out what the crossover in your process is. Look, I mean, I love co-writing. I've spent the whole afternoon working on my next co-written book with Meg Spooner. And when I write solo, I think I am so accustomed to working with my co-authors that I have their voices in my head, and I can do an entire round of editorial before they see the book to critique it, because I know exactly what they'll ask me already. So, I mean, I think, you know, I've just finished revising the sequel to The Isles of the Gods. And as I was revising it, I was revising chunks of chapters and handing them off to Meg, because she's not just my co-author, she's my work wife. So, you know, the people who I collaborate with are so tangled up in the way I write anyway that to some degree it doesn't make a big difference whether I'm technically co-authoring or not. And I think a lot of authors, as they get on in their careers and get really established critique partners, will do so much brainstorming at various points of their drafting and their editing, and so many ideas will come in from other people that there almost is this element of collaboration. And I think I've had some early career authors say to me, but, you know, that's a really good idea, but if I put it in the book, is the book mine? And I'm like, oh, my child, you still have to execute it. So yes, the answer is yes. You have to do the hard bit. You know, brainstorming is easy, executing is not.
It's long.
Yeah.
It is long. Can I just say, like, you've got a critique partner, which is fantastic, but can I just add how valuable a supporting writer group is, or having that circle around you? It is so valuable. Like I said, I run Readers Review, but because we have evolved into the sense of just a community, we have writers and creators. We meet up here and there. There's like 6 of us. We come together with our laptops, and it's just a silent companionship. We're all writing for writer days. It is so valuable.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you both do the same.
Oh yeah, no, the silent guilt of having people writing around you is great.
It's nothing motivates you more.
Yeah. Makes you focus. Get there. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, so thank you so much. So we've got one from Anonymous. Hi, Anonymous. Thanks for your question. How do you come up with the world in your stories that they are set in? That's to both of you.
Ooh. All right, if you want my long answer to this, my podcast is called Amie Kaufman on Writing, and back in season 1, I did a few episodes on world building. So that's my long answer. My short answer is, 1, it has to be consistent. The world has to make sense all the way down. You can't just stick bits together. And what I generally do is to look for a difference between our world and the world I'm writing, and then let everything ripple. So, you know, with Isles, and I know what Astrid's example for this would be with League of Liars, but I'll let you give it. But with Isles, it was, okay, what if there were magicians that could control the elements? Because the change I wanted to effect was I wanted there to be tall sailing ships. And so I decided, well, if they would have stayed reliable if there had been you know, magicians who could control the water and the wind. So I look for one change, and then I let all the different cultural changes ripple out.
I love that image. Yeah, for me, because I do like my worlds first, or my what if concepts, I always start big and then I kind of work in smaller. So that's one of the things my editor once said to me, was that, yeah, you work out your world and then you get smaller and smaller until you kind of figure out how the people relate to the world that you've put them in. So yeah, it's a process that goes through revisions as well. I will never nail the world and the world building and the magic in the first draft. It's just, it does
you
not.
Never will.
It takes time and work through.
Your first draft is only a stepping stone, and you can't edit a blank page, so you got to start somewhere. So true. Belinda Graham.
Well, hang on. I would like everyone to read League of Liars. So Astrid, please tell them your what if for League of Liars, because it's such a good example. And I'm a hype woman.
Okay, thank you, Amie. So League of Liars is what if anyone can tap into magic based in shadows. So essentially you can manipulate time by pulling anything forth from any shadow. So you've then got to look at, well, and that's then illegal because it's dangerous. So how would this world survive when there are shadows everywhere? So then it's like, okay, well, we need to diffuse light. So you kind of ask yourself questions based on that central concept of what is the magic system, or as Amie was saying, what is the difference between our world and the fantasy world?
Wow.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
and like everything that happens in that book essentially ripples from shadows are everywhere. What if they're dangerous?
Right. Yeah.
Yes, now I'm going to be looking
So
at my
clever.
shadow for a while.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Belinda Grant has a question. Belinda, thank you for this. What's something you haven't written in terms of genre or even tropes that you would love to try in the future? Good question. Thank you.
Adult historical. I have about 250 pages of research with my research assistant right now. So watch this space.
Ooh, hello.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Hey.
I'm trying my hand at a romantasy at the moment, as the kids call it.
Yeah.
Romantasy, yes, that's a new thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's not too much out of the league of what I've been writing, but it is for, I guess, not a YA audience.
Fantastic. So here's a question for you. If Astrid and Amie got to collaborate on a subject or a genre that hadn't been done, what do you think you guys would do?
Oh God. What's the overlap in our Venn diagram? The problem is because like I've done sci-fi and you've done kind of murdery thrillers, even if they were, spec fic, they were still murdery. What's left? What haven't we done between us? I'm not writing horror. I'm terrified of horror. I say that acknowledging that I'm responsible for some of the most terrifying scenes in Illuminate that I literally wrote sometimes while saying out loud, it's not true. It's not true. It's not true. It's got to be something else we haven't done. Maybe this is the moment we do contempt. And we'll come back with that panel.
Contemporary, yeah. Oh, goodness.
That would be an interesting collab. I would love to see that one day.
I mean, I read a lot of it. I just don't know if I'd be very good at writing it.
Yeah.
This is one way to find out.
Not sure what would happen in it, because that's the thing. I always throw in murder or magic or something.
Well, it can be a contemporary murder. That's crime.
Yeah, it's right on trend. Okay, there we go.
There we go. We found a niche. I love it.
Yeah.
Karen Stratton has a question. Thanks, Karen. Karen would like to know, who is a character you love to hate, either from your own books or somebody else's?
Ooh, what a good question. I spent so many of my years of my life working as a mediator that like my toxic trait is that I can find a way to be sympathetic to absolutely anybody. So I'm not very, I could always be like, but have we considered their childhood? But have we considered how they might feel? So I don't know that I've ever loved to hate anyone.
I mean, I will say from my own, I love to hate Machiel. He was really fun to write, but I didn't want people to like him. He's not supposed to be likable. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Interesting.
We're lovers, not fighters.
Sure. Anonymous, thank you for your question. What do you think is the difference between YA and NA, which is new adult? Would you ever make the shift from writing YA to NA? Why? Why not?
I mean, I don't know, maybe it's controversial to say I don't think that there's really any difference between upper YA and NA. I think I've got a whole speech about how we don't have as much lower YA these days. And I think it's, harder to sell and market, but I think the readership is there and would eat it up with a spoon. But I mean, NA is like traditionally we think about, college romances and stuff like that. And I think to some degree, that's kind of what shot NA in the foot, is that we think of it as a romance genre rather than, an age bracket of protagonist. But I think that upper YA has probably just expanded to include what we once would have called NA. And I wish that they were separate, because I think that they could be more nuanced if they were.
I 100% agree, and have many times gone on a rant about NA being its own thing, and it needs to be its own thing and more supported in traditional publishing. It's definitely more of a thing in indie publishing, not so much in traditional, and I would love to see it supported more. And I absolutely would love to write NA, and that's what I'm trying to do now with my romantasy. So
romantasy, I love it. It's stretching the boundary to upper YA. I love it.
Yeah.
And you're right. I have to say, I don't see a lot of new adult books being published through traditional publishing. You're right. It's all through self-publishing indie. That's true.
I mean, I think, like, not to vastly oversimplify, but I think that a part of it is that in America, the big stores don't have a shelf for it.
Yeah.
There's a YA section and there's an adult section, but there's not an NA section. And I think it can be something like that can, you know, tip it, that you have to, the book has to be where the reader will walk to find it in the bookshop. And because if you go looking for it and it's not there, then you just either buy something else or you leave. So I think there's this, you know, perhaps that's nothing, but maybe there's like this speed bump in terms of knowing where to put it so the reader will walk to it.
That is true. I often ask that question myself because I write middle grade, and I often got into arguments with people, you know, no, this is young adult. No, it's middle grade. No, it's YA. And at the end, a dear friend of mine, Jeremy Lachlan, said to me, Annie, just write the story you want. Let the booksellers decide where it sits. They will see it.
Yeah.
You're right.
Absolutely.
Sarah Arnold has a question. Thanks, Sarah. She said, hey, Amie and Astrid, you're both currently working on sequels. How has this process differed from writing the first novel in the respective series? Did you prefer writing the first book in the series or the sequel? Thank you so much.
It's a good question. I mean, it's my first experience writing a sequel. So my other books were standalones. I have found it quite different. I mean, in a way, it's easier because you've established the characters, but you also then have to remember everything that happened in the first book and have it resolve in a way that is satisfying, and as well as, you know, having you also have to ask new questions. You can't just have, you know, the sequel, because I'm only doing a duology, just be, you know, answering the questions from the first book. You know, you want there still to be new things to explore, new characters to explore. I would probably say the first draft is easier for a sequel because you do have those world building blocks there. Even though in League of Lies, if you've read the book, the second one, you know, it does kind of pivot into a new direction. But yeah, I think that that's probably the main thing that I've found different between writing a sequel and a first book.
Cool. Yeah. I'm actually keen to know as well, do you reread your first book as you write your sequel, or is it all up in here and you're good to go? Or has it all been written at one time and you just went chop in the middle?
That would probably be an easy way of doing it.
Sure.
I have this thing where I never want to read my books once they've gone to the printer. I don't want to know if I made a mistake. I don't want to know if I would have wanted to reword something. So it has been difficult for me because you don't remember everything. So you do have to go back and check certain things. But I haven't ever gone back and reread my books from start to finish. How about you, Amie?
I write the first draft of the sequel, which, you know, I mean, I'm with you. On one hand, it's much easier because the world's already built and the characters are already established. But on the other hand, you're locked into a whole bunch of stuff. So, and it always takes more efforts to tie up all of the little open threads that you've left than you thought that it would. I tend to write the first draft and then I tend to re-listen to book 1 and or 2 on audio. And that way I don't have to sit there and make because I'm also not a big rereader of my work, but I can be doing other things. And what I'm looking for is anything that contradicts what I put in book 2 or anything that I can use in book 2 because, you know, you lay down little things. So thinking, oh, future me might need this. I'll just make a comment about that existing. So you kind of find things you can pick up. And I'm also looking for any questions that I forgot I had to answer. So,
right.
That's a very good technique. Yeah. Plot holes. Yes, 100%. LT, thank you for your question. LT says, hey, team, loving the chat. Oh, thank you. LT's question is, am I crazy for trying to handle character arcs over multiple books? I am nearly finished my first romantasy book, one of 6. Wow. Each book shows character development, but is it okay to put each character through the emotional ringer over the whole series? Thank you.
I don't know what else you would do, honestly. I think they should be different arcs. They shouldn't be the same, but you know, like say you've got, you know, you're writing a 6-book series and you've got the first one where the couple, you know, get together at the end of it. It's not that you have to break them up and get them together every book. It might be that they are happily together after that, but now there's a new challenge to what their identity is, or, you know, how they perceive themselves, or it's not how they thought it was going to be. I think, you know, for all of my series, I have an arc for each book, and then I also have a much bigger arc, the end of which should anchor where they were at the start of book 1.
Wow. We'll say 1 of 6. That's I'm blown away. 1 of 6. Good on you. Go you,
ambitious.
LT.
Yeah.
Love it. Lexi Reeds is here. Has got a question. Thanks, Lexi. Lexi says, "Hi, Astrid and Amy. Do you have a book that you'd love to read that you feel is underrated in the book community? P.S. Loved Vanishing Deep and Aurora Rising." From Lexi. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Lexi. Oh, who do you want to cheerlead for?
Goodness. I know.
It's like how much time we got.
Yeah. I'm just gonna
underrepresented.
All right. I'm gonna start with this one. In the Dark Spaces by Callie Black. I don't want to tell you too much about it except to say it is Australian spec fic. It is set in space. It has some really interesting class stuff and some really interesting science stuff, and it's very good, and it's not like what you've read before. And this is by Lisa Fuller. The book I mentioned I was rereading at the moment, Ghost Bird. Lisa is a Murray woman from up in Queensland, and this has a lot of her people's culture in it. It has a lot of, it's terrifying, but very, very cool. And like she did a lot of really cool cultural consultation to make sure that she was sharing the right parts and not sharing the rest with us. But like, yeah, it's a privilege to read, and it's also just such a banger. Those are books I think everyone should be reading and appreciating.
Yeah, great recommendations. Mine's an old one. All Our Yesterdays by Kristen. I absolutely adore this book.
I debuted with Kristen. We were like, we were the 2 Hyperion books in 2013. She's such a legend.
Well, there you go. It came out in 2013. It's a really great take on a time travel book, and it's like looking at before the girl goes back in time and then after, and the different perspectives between her. And I don't want to give too much away, but it is a fantastic standalone. And I'm currently reading When Ghosts Call Us Home from Katja de Becerra, which comes out on the 19th of October. And we're having a book launch on the 19th of October in Melbourne. So sorry for those of you not in Melbourne, but for those of you who are, please come along.
I just nearly clicked away to put it in my diary. I'll do that after. I wasn't chatting for a minute.
It is the 19th. I know that date because that's when my deadline is, and I'm like, great, I can celebrate her book. So it's a horror, a YA horror, and it's this great concept where the protagonist used to live in a haunted house, and there was this film that was shot with her older sister back then. It became a cult classic. And so she returns to this house as an adult, and it's really creepy and perfect time to read it during spooky season.
Halloween.
So
she sent me an arc of that, and I'm too scared to read it. I'm like, soon. I'll read it soon. I promise. I want to give a shout out to Katja. Actually, Katja de Becerra. She also wrote What the Woods Keep and Oasis. She was my editor for this Fresh Hell anthology that just came out. It's got 19 stories in there, short stories with the horror tropes as well. Narelle M. Harris was also the editor. Fantastic supporting writers. Oh, it was great. Yeah. So I'm actually quite honored to be published among those stories as well. It was really cool. Cool. Okay, where are we up to? Quentin Lee. Hi, Quentin. Thanks for your question. Quentin would like to know, are you ever nervous about new releases, whether readers have specific interests that have changed in your writing or may not want to give your new work a chance? I'm going to announce my sophomore novel soon, but I'm a bit intimidated since it's different from my debut. That's a good question, because I'm sorry to jump in, but I have known people who, or writers that get pigeonholed in a particular series or type of writing, and they get very excited when their new work comes out, and then they get deflated. So I'm very interested to know about your views.
Yeah, I think I think I used to probably get more nervous than I do these days, but I think that one, you do have to understand that a lot of readers really do glom onto a series rather than a particular author, so they may not follow, and that's okay. Because two, YA readership, as with middle grade readership and more than any other, is a sort of a river, and readers are always passing through. But someone who reads adult crime now is probably going to read adult crime for the rest of their lives, but someone who reads YA now might not read YA for the rest of their lives. So you sort of have to be at peace with the idea that you'll be continually picking up new readers, and that's just sort of how it goes.
True.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, as long as you're happy with the book that you put out there, there will be someone who reads it and loves it. So
yeah.
I think, it might not be the same amount of people or the same people who loved the first one, but I do think that, books find their readers, and there will always be someone who loves it.
They do. And they find their readers over time as well. That, we have this odd focus on how a book does right out of the gate. And that comes from America, where they have like the New York Times bestseller list, and, the first week sales really matter, but it doesn't matter anywhere else. And it doesn't even really matter there. And, every book that you then put out will send more readers back to the earlier books that you've written. So people will continue, it's a very small group of very online people who care about whether something's a new release. Everyone else, they'll just see it in a bookshop, they'll see it in a library, someone will recommend it, and they don't say, oh, it's been out 6 years, I don't know about that. They will continue to pick it up. So I think you sort of got to play the long game.
Yeah, and I think things like TikTok have really fed into where the books are becoming popular, years after they've and it's not about any marketing push. It's just this organic kind of growth where readers are finding it, they're sharing their love on TikTok, whatever social media they use, and then other people are finding it, and so it rolls on.
So it goes.
Yeah.
That is so true. And I have to say, as a reader myself, I've often found myself reading a book that might not have been their first or earlier works. It's like my gateway to their work.
Yeah.
And then you get so caught up with it, and you're like, oh, okay, wait, I need to read the whole series. Next thing you know, you have an auto by author.
That's it. Like they're, if the second book comes out and the readers of the first book don't immediately go, oh yes, must have more. And a bunch of them will. A bunch of them will say, I trust that you did this well, so you're going to do that well. But also a whole other bunch will show up, and over time will show up. So
it's a marathon, not a sprint. Yeah. Marathon, not a sprint. Our final question comes from Anonymous. Thank you. Hi, Amie and Astrid. For a new writer, how do you ensure that your ideas don't directly stem from books that you've read? Thank you.
Oh, I mean, I think they probably do. Like,
well, we're all inspired somehow.
But I mean, if we go back to the creative compost thing, everything comes from what you've taken in. There are no new ideas, and I think I would draw the distinction between using the same trope and using an idea that is executed in exactly the same way as someone else did. A bunch of smart people have kind of said in the past, that the trope is the song and the writer is the singer. So, there's Astrid and I could both write a heist, or we could both write a murder mystery, or both write, even, a heist that is carried off by, I don't know, a gang of high school students who are all in detention together, and, there's a football player and a this, that, and the other. Like, we could both start with that and it'd still be different. So you're the singer. That's what makes it different, rather than it being totally different to, in description.
Yeah, I agree.
You know what? I'm just thinking, heist. There's a collaboration opportunity right there.
Oh, I don't know, man. When we started writing the heist in Aurora Rising, there's a big heist scene with a masked ball and everything, and I got just a little way in and was like, oh, heists, difficult, huh? So I emailed Lee Bardugo, who had just done Six of Crows, and was like, heists, huh? What's your advice? And her email that came back was just like, don't. When pressed, she had more helpful advice than that. But the first advice was probably the right advice. Yeah. Heists, man, really hard. It's like anytime you write a character and you're like, oh, this character is a genius, or this character is really charismatic. And then you're like, oh, no. No, I've got
to be those things. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-oh.
Honestly, I could sit here all night and talk to both of you because it's been a flourishing conversation. It's been sparkling, but we are coming towards the end of our panel, which is very unfortunate. But to start closing us out and heading to the finish line, I'm going to ask you a very controversial question. In the event, and I'm touching wood when I say this, that your house is on fire and you have to evacuate and you can only take one book away with you, what would that be?
Oh.
And I'm touching wood because I hope to God this never happens.
That's right. I know. Do you want me to give you thinking time, Astrid?
Yes, please.
So when I was in grade 6, my high school librarian, Mrs. Amie, told me that her desert island book was The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. And I remember at the time being very impressed by that and thinking, how good must a book be to be your desert island book? And so very shortly after that, I got my first ever book voucher for my local bookshop, which is still my local bookshop today. And so 11-year-old Amie went marching down and handed over her book voucher and, hello, I would like The Dark is Rising, please. And it turned out, of course, to be one of 5 books in a series. And they gave me this beautiful omnibus edition of all 5 books in the series, which I still reread. I've actually just had to buy a new copy of The Dark is Rising because the covers come off and the pages are coming out. So now it's more of a look at book and I've had to buy a reading copy. But I still reread it every Christmas. And it just occurred to me a few years ago that, you know, even in 1990s prices, I don't think that omnibus edition did cost $20. I think the bookseller just understood how important it was and wanted me to have it and gave it to me for $20. And so it's not just because it's my favorite book, it's because of how I got it. It's because someone cared about me reading it and made it happen. So.
Oh, that is magical.
Yeah. I mean, you have a cat under each arm, so I don't know what you're grabbing in this house.
I know. My 2 are sleeping behind me. Luckily, they're not snoring like they were before because I don't know what I would take. I don't think I have any special editions of anything or any signed books that. I mean, I do have an early arc of 40 Queens, which I got people to sign at the launch here. Mm-hmm. So that would probably be the one that I would take because it does have special meaning. Yeah. Otherwise, I would probably just reorder all my books.
Yeah.
Get like box after box delivered of all my favorite books to
it reminds me.
Pro tip, readers, take a photo now or a video of your bookshelves and email it to yourself so that for your insurance claim, when you're like, no, I did have 5,000 books. Yeah. They're like, you can be like, pictures, Your Honor.
100%. It reminds me of that meme I once saw. There was like an Amazon truck that was passing by a unit block and someone took a photo of it from their window. It's like, oh, good, my delivery's here. That's exactly what will happen if that happened to us. It's such a difficult question to answer because, like Amie said, like we own thousands of books. But if it was me, God forbid, I could reorder everything. But as a lifelong Michael Jackson fan, I would have to keep Moonwalk, which was his autobiography that I found in a secondhand bookshop. And when I was doing reader's review and the theme was 80s, I was passing the book around and someone said, Annie, have you got this book valued? I said, what do you mean? And she turned to the front. And I didn't see this before, but it was autographed. And it found out it was one of the first editions that he himself autographed at HarperCollins. Jackie Onassis was his editor. I'm like, okay, mine. No one take that.
Yeah, maybe put that somewhere safe and stop handing it around.
In a safe box. In a safe box.
Yeah.
So that would be mine, I have to say. But unfortunately, that's where we have to leave it. So I want to thank you both, Astrid and Amie, for being here tonight and spending your time with us online. I do hope one day we can meet again in person. Yeah. I also want to thank Ivana Triglio, our founder and director, for all the brilliant work that she's done, not just to step up with the team, putting all of this together. It's been fantastic watching Book Fair Australia grow. It takes a village to put something like this together. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsors. So our silver sponsors, Booktopia, Book Edition, and Virtual Room. Thank you so much for all of your support. And our bronze sponsors, of course, we've got Ingram Spark, Awaken Fables, Calligraphy Print, Better Read Than Dead, who is our sit-in bookstore at Book Fair Australia, and Selena Fennick as well. Thank you so much for your support. It means so much. Without you, we cannot have this this amazing session. But to all the participants for watching and for your questions, thank you so much for being here. Any last words, Astrid and Amie? The floor is yours.
No, thank you so much for having us. It's a delight to get to be a part of it.
Yeah, it was such a wonderful chat, and I wish you all the best for the actual event in person, and hope that it's a wonderful success. I'm sure it will be.
I'm sure it will be. Second year running, it's come such a long way since its first, and I'm so proud of how far it's come. I'm absolutely honoured to be their MC for that entire weekend. You're getting a few thank yous in the Q&A chat. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks,
and just a final reminder as well, 14th and 15th of October 2023, the doors will be opening at Sydney Olympic Park for Book Fair Australia. Tickets are still available, so head to www.bookfairaustralia.com.au for more information on our guests, sponsors and tickets. And once again, Amie and Astrid, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful
See you next time.
See you then. Bye, everyone. You too.
Bye, guys.
Bye all.